we're early days.
Mhm.
So I feel like the approach I like to take is to think like, what is it that a large language model can do that's a complement to what I can do? Where can it do something I otherwise don't want to do? So I mean, I'm
Mhm.
pretty pragmatic. We've joked about this, like it's software. It's pretty impressive software. It is software.
Mhm.
So thinking of it as something that is going to help me analyze material, analyze data, and at the same time give me new ways to prompt my own reflection.
Mhm.
That to me is a very powerful thing about artificial intelligence, is that any of these current models, particularly large language models that have such a strong base in specific languages, that means
Mhm.
I can really work from a very strong, solid foundation, no pun intended, that
Mhm.
it can be my search tool for common phrases, for familiar formations. Like I think of it as a genre detector,
Mhm.
a pattern detector.
Mhm.
Um, I think the places it can go are in many ways up to us seeing its promise as a very complementary toolkit.
Mhm.
We'll, I don't mean this in a bad way, but up to this point, we've scraped existing text and images, and that is a paltry representation of not only the human experience and existence, but like exchange. Like what we're just beginning to understand, we're not really modeling individual human decision making at all. We're capturing what is the endpoint of a lot of back and forth among groups of people in a setting. So I think the future of AI is getting to a place where we're thinking about how can it start modeling, and how can we point it towards
Mhm.
modeling context
Mhm.
and thinking about
Mhm.
how much setting matters. It is a very strong force on the decisions that people make. We don't just make up what we want to do. We do
Mhm.
it in relation to others. We're creating a very fancy word cloud right now. And there's nothing inherently bad about
Mhm.
taking an approach that says, I know what these words um, mean in a specific language. Moving from that to losing track of the way in which words and their meaning and the weight they carry typically are something that come out through an interaction. Like if I want to say something loving to you and I know you well, I use a set of words that, if you're doing sentiment analysis, will pick up on the really loud notes, but are
Mhm.
never going to get at the nuance. And that,
Right.
again, for some questions, doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. And so to be able to really think, does your research question call on you to get at the undertones, at the nuance of what people feel? Because when they say something and it's a word and it's embedded as a label in a set of
Mhm.
words, and then we've got a really fancy tool that's got all of the correlations of embedded words, that's lovely, but it does not help you get closer to what's that nuance. That's interpretation. So I think my skepticism is because sentiment analysis has worked with the assumption, if I see quantity, if I see more or less of this word or that word, and now if I see more or less of these constellation of words, I know something about how you feel. I do not believe for most of how humans express meaningful feelings that tells us much. It tells
Mhm.
us what are words people are deploying. And words are strategies. When we say
Mhm.
something, we're being, you know, um, whether we're being more or less strategic is a question, but it doesn't get it um, a very clear sense of what's the need somebody's trying to meet when they use those words.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
most of the time, qualitatively, we're trying to get at like, what's that unmet need? Like, what is
Right.
it that somebody, like emotions, that's Yeah. Again,
No,
handy
I hear
tool,
you.
kind of cute. Love word embedded
Yeah.
things. Happy, sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, too simplistic for the
Just
human
listen.
experience.
What does it mean to be transparent?
No, I think we are, I mean, this is the hardest part. We have to accept that we can't debias models,
Right.
or rather, that will only make sense with particular kinds of problem solving. There are certain problems we need to solve. They can't begin to be solved until we know what trained that model. There is no way around today, as we currently develop artificial intelligence, there's no way around knowing what data trained a model is fundamental to verifying what kind of bias do I need to look for, not whether it exists or not. Like start with, yeah, it exists. There's weighting that happens. There's weighted ways of voicing things that are a part of how we speak. So, working with that as a starting point, rather than I wonder if my data is biased. Working with it's biased, what would I need to do to understand what kind of biases exist? For example, if I'm thinking about something where I specifically want to understand how gender operates, as somebody who's pretty invested in gender studies, like I do have to understand what is it that people share as the way they articulate gender. What does that mean in the context in which I'm studying? Like I can't really begin if I start with the assumption that gender is something biological and I'm literally trying to just find who fits my box of what counts as gender. That will work for some questions. That will completely fall apart for anything that is meaningfully about what gender means in society or what gender means to particular people. So it's not ruminating on that. It's like taking very seriously at the beginning of research design. Am I asking the questions and reaching the opportunities for learning from people about how they see the world to be able to get at my research problem? Like qualitatively speaking, it's not a numbers game. So I have to understand who are my interlocutors, who are my participants. We used to call them subjects. I really hate data subjects. So if that, then transparency is genuinely show me the receipts. And this is the place where I think we get hung up. I love working with Data Nutrition Project. It's one of my favorite projects because they have a really nice model for like, how would you literally have a sense of what is roughly in your model? Now we haven't done due diligence. So we're right now working with models like nobody knows where it came from. Nobody knows what's in it.
Right.
Okay.
I think a lot of model developers don't know what's in it.
100%. No, and it's like
yeah.
we have to care about that. And now that we do, because that was what talking about bias and transparency prompted. It was like, well, wait a minute, I kind of have to know what's in this thing. We're going to start coming up with ways to keep track, to keep provenance of the data that we have. And to me, that transparency is not only what's in that data set, it's keeping a running record of what are the ways in which I am working with this model, I've added to this model, like that transparency. And at the end of the day, communicating that to the people that generate data, like that to me is our number one priority right now, is making sure anybody generating data understands that that is what they're doing. And we are just starting to do that. That keeps me up at night.
Aside from biases based on gender, race, ethnicity, culture, what other type of biases are you worried about? Thinking of things like the way information is being analyzed, maybe model was trained in a way that makes it closed-minded, for instance. So it doesn't find surprising insights. I think that's a really, really good question. Like there is a bias of like social attributes, and then there is a bias of like thinking inside the box.
Yeah, and actually, I think there's a Venn diagram there. So when we That's such a great, I think it's the most pressing question because we are moving so quickly to, I want to find the normative answer. That's what we're doing when we use AI models right now. When we use foundation models, we're like, what's the most typical assortment of words and images that are associated with what I'm prompting? Again, it's not that it's good or bad, but it's generating something that is producing homogeneity. Because, and Rita Kadri and colleagues at Google Research have a beautiful paper on the severe limits of text to image model, like what models come out of text to image ML, precisely because we start overfitting when we have less data. So that paper, the short version is like, guess what kinds of images come up when you put in Middle East? You know, that to start making assumptions and not, you know, to start with assumptions rather than start with challenging your assumptions is the worst thing we could possibly do. And unfortunately, the long-term effect is we can't measure that right now. So it's going to be this cumulative effect if we're not hyper vigilant and really, I think, challenging the approach to AI that is typical today, where it's like foundation model, we're done. If we're not all constantly pushing for like, okay, what's next to update it, we're going to have to really engage people. Oh, they should be engaged and mutually benefiting from this. What does this look like? If we don't go that direction, we are headed for not so much this risky, edgy world, so much as an incredibly dull one that is alienating. And imagine something constantly telling you, you need to pick a different word because your word isn't the right one. Like, I think that's what worries me the most is that if this, for most of the people using this tool today, it works for them. And that is the problem. They are not most of the world. The global majority has not been a part of this process.